Hey everybody, Hake Hardware here, and in this video we are going to go over how to get a Debian VM set up in Proxmox. And I constantly find myself going back to this guide because whenever I need to stand up a new service or application that requires some functionality that I can't get in an LXC, then I will use a Debian VM since that typically can handle almost any use case that I need. So for instance, if I'm deploying image or Nextcloud AIO, I will use, or even like Plex or Jellyfin, I'm going to use a Debian VM to deploy it because I'm typically going to want to use Samba shares and do things that just are a little complicated with an LXC. And I like to just have a more dedicated VM for something like that. So this guide will just walk you through how I typically set up a Debian VM. So the first thing is you're going to want to download the ISO. So we're going to open up I usually do the net install ISO. So if I go to this web page here, AMD 64 is what most people are going to use, but if you have an ARM board or something else, you probably know that you have that and you should download the appropriate version. So we're going to do the AMD 64 and we'll just wait for that to download real quick. And I do have Proxmox. This is my bench testing Proxmox. I'm also running a replica Pi-hole here, but everything else is pretty much default here. I've just created this Proxmox server and I've only done the Proxmox helper scripts just to set up all the repositories and do the updates. But what we need to do is upload the ISO to Proxmox so we can use it to install Debian. So we'll go to our local LVM here, actually just our local, not the LVM. And then under ISO images, we're going to click upload. You could also download from URL, but I just find it easier to upload. I'm just going to select the file. I'm going to go to downloads here and just grab the Debian, and then we'll click upload. We're going to do a little copy command here, and then we should see task OK. And now we're able to install from the ISO. And by the way, if you haven't seen my other videos, I will link to this wiki here. There's lots of other videos, and some of them are just guides. There's no videos yet. But I do have a little backlog of videos that I'm creating, so most of them will eventually have videos that are associated with them. All right, so we have downloaded and then uploaded our ISO. Now we're going to create the VM. Now I'm going to be selecting various resources for this VM, but as the note says here, depending on what you're deploying, you're going to want to adjust the resources to fit the application or service that you're going to be installing on that VM. Also, I usually do CLI only. I don't install a desktop, so keep that in mind. If you do want a desktop, I'll call it out when we get to it, but you can also install like a graphical user interface as well. So now that we have our ISO, we can come in here and we can click Create VM. I'm just going to call it Debian VM, but I usually will name it as a service, whatever service. So if I'm installing Plex or image, I'll just put the actual name here of what it is. And then VM ID, this will auto-populate to the next one. So I have a 100, now it'll do 101, the next one will be 102. I usually just leave it default, but certain people have naming conventions that they like to follow. Also, if you have more than one node, you could select it here. I only have one node in my data center, so I'll just leave it as Mario. Now for the OS, we're going to click the drop down for ISO image, grab the Debian image, and we'll leave everything else as the defaults. Now for modern systems, I recommend for machine using Q35 and for BIOS using UEFI. If you do use UEFI BIOS, you'll just add an EFI storage, which I usually just use my local LVM. And I will uncheck pre-enroll keys. And I do like to have the QEMU or however you say it, agent installed. But this should be good. So we'll click Next. And now for disk size, I'm going to leave it as 32 gigabytes, but again, if you're installing something where you're going to be using the OS drive to store larger files, you might want to do a little bit larger of a system here, but Debian, it does not take a lot of system resources just by itself, so I'm going to leave it as 32 gigabytes. Cache, I recommend looking at the documentation to see if this makes a difference for you. There are some optimizations you can do by changing the cache, but also there are some risks. Sometimes you sacrifice speed for data protection, so I'm just going to leave it as default where there's no cache. I am going to turn on discard. I'm not entirely sure if it matters, but all the guides I see online always say to use discard. This is an SSD, or actually an NVMe that it's being installed on, so it's possible that there may be some benefits. We'll just click next. Again, this is going to be sockets, so I only have one CPU, so I'm only going to use one socket. If you have like a dual socket motherboard, you might want to use both sockets and single core from each just to split the load. But I'm going to just keep that at 1. For type, you almost always want to do host. That's going to give you all the features of your CPU. I can't even really think of a reason why you wouldn't just use host. I've always used that, but there could be some benefits that I'm not aware of. I'm just going to bump this up to 2 cores. I don't think I ever do anything less than 2 cores, but again, it's going to depend on the resources. Like for Nextcloud, I think you're going to want to at least do like 6 cores. Image, you want at least 4 cores. It really is going to depend on what services you're going to be deploying on the VM. Memory, again, we're just going to do 4096, so 4 gigabytes. It's going to depend on the resources that you need. Network, I'm going to leave everything the same. I don't need a VLAN tag. I just use the default bridge network. And I set my static IP addresses for my virtual machines on my router. So you can either set it on the host itself, or if what I like about containers is you can set it right here in the network tab. But for VMs, you're either going to have to set it on the host or go into your router and set the static IP address. We'll just click next. And then from here, we can just do start after created, and we'll click finish. So jumping back to our guide here, we're all the way through here and we're starting the VM. So I like to just do everything initially in the console, and then I will move to Termius, which is my SSH manager, where I can just add different hosts. I prefer that because it's a lot easier to copy and paste. I never can really copy and paste in the Proxmox UI, so I recommend getting an SSH manager, or honestly even just using a terminal. I could open up like a PowerShell here and SSH in, or if you're using Linux already, you just open up a terminal, and as long as you have the SSH client, you should be able to SSH in. But let's get this installed first. So we'll jump to the new VM that we just created. We'll go to console, and we can see we can now select graphical install. You could just do a non-graphical install, but why not? Let's just do graphical. We have our keyboard and mouse hooked up, so it should be pretty easy. First thing you're going to do is select the language. Mine will be English. Select your location. Mine will be United States. Select the keyboard, American English for me. A little bit of configuration here, but it's usually pretty quick. All right, so for the host name, I almost always, very similar to when creating a VM, I use the name of the service, the primary service or application. If you're going to be doing a bunch of services and applications on your host, this isn't really applicable, but for me, if I'm installing just image, I like to keep all of my VMs single purpose. That way I can finely tune the resources for them. I don't mind having like 10 VMs with 10 different services. Some people might just want to set up one VM and run all 10 services, but I find for backups and separation of concerns that just running a different VM for everything is best. So I will usually put the host name as the service that I'm going to be running for that VM. I'm just going to leave it as Debian here. I don't put anything for my domain. It's not necessary for me. And for most people, it's not going to be necessary. Set up your root password. And then, so for me, I always use Hake hardware. I keep a consistent username for every single VM I use. That way, it's just easy. And then it'll autofill in the actual username and then set up a secure, strong password. I modify my passwords for each VM just so that for security reasons, and I also just have a password manager that makes it really easy to jump through different passwords as needed. Set your time zone. I'm going to select Arizona. You're only going to really see one disk available here, but we're going to use the entire disk and set up an LVM. And we're going to select the only disk available. And then I prefer all files in one partition. You can separate them if you want, but I personally don't see a benefit for that for most use cases. Likely, it's one of those things where if you need to select a different one, you probably already know that you need to. And then we're going to go ahead and select yes to write the changes and configure the LVM. You could technically leave this as default. It's going to default to the maximum size, but I just put max just because I like to do it that way. And then yes, let's write the changes to the disk. This is a one-way door, so make sure that you really want to do this. The disk will have all the changes written to it, and the base system will get installed. And then we will go through setting up the packages and a few more things before the operating system is good to go. Okay, so for scan installation media, I don't have any extra installation media, so I'm just going to click no. For most people, that's going to be a no. And then we're trying to find a Debian mirror that's close to me, so I'm going to keep it set as United States. And I'm just going to use deb.debian.org. I don't have an HTTP proxy. For most people, it's going to be none. All right, it's up to you if you want to participate in popularity contest. It's basically just sending metadata on which packages you install. I just click no, but I don't really see a downside to just leaving it as yes as well. Up to you. And then this is where you could have a desktop environment installed. So I actually don't want GNOME or I think you probably have to keep Debian desktop environment, and you can select like GNOME or XFCE, whichever like flavor you want here. But I really just am going to be SSHing into this because I'm using it specifically to install applications that don't need a GUI, because typically they're like web interfaces like Plex or Jellyfin or Image or any of those things. And then I do want the standard system utilities, although we are going to have to install some additional packages once we get everything installed. So we'll just click continue here. All right, so the installation is complete. We'll click continue to reboot. And while that's happening, we can actually unmount the installation media. So if we go to hardware, you go to CD drive here. This is actually the ISO. You can remove that. It's no longer needed. And it's going to just show a cross out here. This won't actually disappear until you turn off the VM and turn it back on again. So if we go into console, we can see we can log in. I'm just going to log in as root and put in my password. And then I'm actually, we want to install some packages. So we could actually SSH into this right now, but I find it easier to just install sudo real quick and then add my user to sudo and then SSH in. Otherwise, you'll have to drop into root anyways and install everything. It's just kind of a pain. So we're going to do apt install sudo. And you probably do apt update first, just to make sure you're getting the latest version. And then we can do usermod -ag sudo and then your username. So for me, it's going to be Hake Hardware. And now my Hake Hardware user is in the sudo user group, so I can use sudo commands. I really wish they just installed that by default, but I'm not sure. Maybe there's a reason why they don't. But with that being said, let's actually shut down the VM real quick. And we do have QEMU installed, so we can do all the typical VM commands from the UI if we want. And then when we go to hardware, we can see that installation media is gone. Let's just start it up again. And since we have the agent installed, we can actually see the IP address here once it boots up. So let's just give it a second here. The guest agent will be running shortly, and then we'll have the IP address and we can SSH into it. We can always monitor what's going on with the console. Oh, we are here, so there we go. You might have to go to the console and then back, but here's my IP address. Let's just copy that. We'll go in here and let's add a new host. We'll paste that IP address in here and we'll just do Debian VM. And like I said, I have some passwords saved here depending on my VMs. This is just a common one I use temporarily. I'll click connect and we'll just add and continue and we will be in our VM here. So there are a few other things, and actually in the guide, I'm pretty sure I have I SSH into the system, and then yeah, so you could either do it the way I just showed, or in the guide I drop to the root user. So you could do su dash, and that'll be the root user basically at the root directory. But you don't need to if you install sudo first from the console in the web UI and then SSH into it. So you can see there's the command here, user mod, after installing. And actually I have in the guide installing like all of the interesting things here. You don't need to install them all. You definitely want sudo. htop is just like a monitoring thing. Curl is for doing like HTTP requests. Git's just good if you're going to be cloning any repositories, and sysutils is good for if you're going to be mounting a Samba share or anything like that. So it's up to you if you want to install those. It's a good idea to do a apt update and apt install, but I've noticed that typically, so let's do sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade -y. I noticed that there's not really any updates that are needed typically. After the net install, I'm thinking that it must grab the latest packages and install all the latest stuff. So most of the time you don't need to do updates as soon as you get going. And then if you want to install Docker, I do like the Docker script. It's some people say, never install like a script from the internet, but for the most part, if you want to be safe about it, you could curl it. So let's run this curl command. I forgot to install curl, so sudo apt install curl. Let's install that. So we can curl, and then if you want a cat, you can see exactly what the script does. There's also another command which is helpful. You could do a dry run basically of the install. So let me bring, and it'll show you exactly basically what it's going to do. So it's going to execute the script. It's going to run apt-get. It's going to set the Debian front-end environmental variable and do some certificate stuff, and then eventually it's going to install Docker and everything. So it's really up to you what you want to do, how safe you want to be. This is a pretty well-known script, but if for some reason it gets compromised and they make changes to the install script, you could have your system have some vulnerability installed. So it's always kind of a judgment call. I like the convenience, so I'm just going to do sudo sh install docker, and this will get Docker installed instead. These are just the commands that I'd be copy pasting in anyways, and this will just speed up the process a little bit. I almost install Docker on almost everything because for most of the applications and services that I use, Docker is the recommended way. Again, some people might think that spinning up a whole VM just for a Docker container is crazy, but I have a TrueNAS system set up with Samba shares, and I find it way easier just to create those Samba shares within each VM rather than try and pass through things from Proxmox. It's really, there's always going to be people that want to do it a different way. This is just the way that I do it. But a base Debian system is a great starting point for a lot of different things. So hopefully this is helpful. And then you can run sudo systemctl status docker if you want to just make sure that it's running. And from here, you could do any number of things. So since I'm running Docker, I'll usually install the Portainer agent. If you're using the LXC helper script for Debian, then you basically well, it's the Docker helper script, but I think it basically installs Debian 12. It will have an option to automatically install Portainer or the Portainer agent, depending on if you already have a Portainer server running. But otherwise, it's pretty quick and easy to add your Debian system to Portainer, whatever you need to do. So if you're following any of these other guides, like my image guide here, you're going to note that you're going to want to follow this Debian VM guide before you get started. That way you have a base system to get image up and running. So that will be a future video actually pretty soon. I love image. It's a great application and I highly recommend anybody to use it. There is a warning on the website that's under heavy development, so you always want to make sure you have backups. And I'm going to do another video on a really cool backup script for image, since there's not a great way to do backups. Luckily, I am using TrueNAS for my photo storage, so that's almost like a backup because the photos actually are available. You can get them, it's just a pain. But yeah, with photos, you always want to follow the 3-2-1 rule as far as backups. So anyways, I am digressing. Hopefully this guide was helpful. I know when I first got into Proxmox, even doing just like a Debian VM was kind of complicated, but it is pretty straightforward once you've done it a few times. All right, hopefully this was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.